Afternoon, good evening. So my name is Jorge Pinto. I'll be sharing this session, so concurrent session number 6, entitled Basic Income, Climate Justice and Political Philosophy. We have actually 3 presentations. I don't know if in the virtual or digital program this was updated, but in the printed version, we only have 2 of them because the third one was added at last minute. So the 3 sessions are, first one, the role of basic income in a just transition to overcome climate crisis. And this is authored by Stella, who is already connected, I see. And Hefin, so Stella Gabuljah, sorry, and Hefin Gwilym from Bangor University, both of the authors. The second talk will be from Nicholas Langridge from University of Bath, and it is titled A Post-Growth Unconditional Basic Income, Bridging the Gap Between Radical Visions and the Empirical Evidence. And the third one, which is the one that we here in Seoul don't have in our printed program, is authored by Neil Coleman and is titled Can Basic Income Contribute to Inclusive Development in South Africa? A Review of Recent Proposals. So I asked the authors to keep it within 15 minutes with, of course, some tolerance. And I now give the word to Stella. Please.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me.
Perfectly.
All right. Okay. So, good morning from here. And as you've already introduced, I'll just try to share my screen. Sorry about that. Give me a second. And can you see my screen?
Not yet, no.
Oh, not yet. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, now it's working perfectly. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you. So as you mentioned, my name is Stella Gabuljah, from a PhD student in Bangor University, and Dr. Hefin Gwilym is my supervisor, and I was supposed to present with him, but due to call, he will not be able to join us this morning, but he do send his greetings to all of you. So if I hear you clearly, you said I've got 15 minutes to present, right? Can you hear me? Am I giving 15 minutes? Yeah, 15 minutes. Okay, so I will just jump into it. So this morning, for the next 15 minutes, this is what I will be presenting on. I will look at the role of universal basic income policy, which is UBI, in a just transitioning to overcome climate crisis or climate change. So this is the outline. I'll look at climate change, and then I'll look at just transitioning. When we talk of just transitioning, what does it mean? And then I will look at UBI and try to look at to conclude with the roles that UBI can actually play as we transitioning to, overcome climate crisis. So I'll just quick start by looking at what is climate change. So as you can see from my screen, when we talk of climate change, it refers to a change in the average conditions, like temperature, and either increases, rising of temperatures, and excessive rainfall, which most of the time results in floods and bring other effects upon humanity. And this was actually defined by NASA And the Met Office, that they also define climate change as the long-term. Sorry. Yeah. So the Met Office also define climate change as the long-term shift in average weather patterns across the world. And if you look at climate change, actually, it actually started, that is back in the mid-18th, which my time will not permit me to go into the history of climate change, but we all know that that is when, around that time, and when the industrialization started. And due to that, human activities also starting, popping in, people trying to burn fossil fuels like the coals to produce energy. And due to, in the process of burning these coals, then carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are also released into the air. And when these greenhouse gases released into the air, it's kind of form like a mat, if I'm allowed to use that word. And then as time goes on, it then blocks the system, and that is what we are experiencing today as some of the effects of climate change, like we see in rises in our temperatures, and then other, extensive rainfalls that we are experiencing, or most of the time in the global south. And as I have already mentioned, so these are some of the causes of climate change. And human activities, like I said, the burning of fossil fuels like the coal and oil and gas. And the literature on climate change actually makes us to understand that in our current world, about 80% of our energies come from these fossil fuels. So it's either the coal or the oil and the gas. And this shows that, it's not a good thing for our climate. It's not a healthy thing for our climate. And then most of the time when you mention of climate change, some people try, and they start to think about big industries and other things. But then causes of climate change, it is caused by you and I. We are all part of the causes. Why? Because we all use oil, we use gases, we go in our homes to warm ourselves in our homes, and of course factories and transport that we take. So all of these activities that we engage ourselves, they all contribute to what we see today as the effect of climate crisis, if you like. And then we also have a natural cause of climate change, which is the methane. So it is actually the presence in the atmosphere that affects, the air temperature and the climate system. So all of these activities coming together is what we see today as the causes of the effects of climate change. So I'll quickly jump into the effects of climate change, and these are some of the effects of climate change. And I'm sure we've all experienced some of them, if not all of them, at least some of them. So we've seen speedy level of the ocean rising, and then ocean acidification, warmer and wetter winters. So as we all know, of course, winter is supposed to be cold, but then it goes beyond as it's supposed to be. And we've seen from the news, and if we've not experienced it directly, we've seen from the news frequent and intense weather extremes, right? So either hotter and the drier summers, we do experience heat wave and things like that, extreme weather events. And of course, when these things happens, when there is extensive rainfall and there is flood and people are being forced out of their homes because their home has been covered with water, or there were heat wave somewhere and the bush bent and got into people's home. It makes these people homeless. It makes them refugees. And then, so this also contributes to the increase in climate refugees. So as we can see here from this picture, we can see drought as an consequences or effects of climate change. You can see flood, we can see we can see people's home being destroyed and things like, and extensive lack of water. So now I want to quickly move on to just transition. So when we talk of just transitioning, and to simply put it, is transitioning to a low carbon economy, or if you like, transitioning to a low carbon CO2 economy. And when we talk of just transition, it highlights transitioning away from fossil fuels. And we all know that the fossil fuels, contribute to the high level of the CO2, that is the carbon dioxide that we have in our system. So to summarize everything around the idea of just transitioning is just the whole world or the group coming together to move from where we are now to a low carbon economy. And other researchers have also tried to define, they've tried to define a just transition. So it also kind of involves everyone coming together and to make sure it's a process that we move out from where we are currently in and the high level of the CO2 that we produce in our atmosphere, which is unhealthy for our climate, and looking at the consequences of it for the next generation Midwest. So we all coming together and to move from there, and then moving to greener economy. So, and that is greener energy. And so looking at the theorization of just transition. So when we actually talk of the just transitioning, it has 3 core research areas. So we are now looking at the energy justice, we are looking at environmental justice, and of course, climate justice. But well, for my presentation, you see me more focusing on the climate justice because that is what my presentation is actually on. But then when you talk of the just transition, it's not only about we focusing on the climate. We're also looking at the energy, because if we are saying we are moving out from the fossil fuels, then that means that we need to get something in place to, and that will keep on giving us the energy that we are currently enjoying from we burning the fossil fuels. And that is when the energy, the greener energy comes in, and then it's not just going back, it has to also be, there has to be a justice over there. So combining this, as some people call it, EEC, that is the energy, environmental, and climate change. Climate justice is what comes together as a just transition. So a just transitioning is also seen as an inclusive approach. Why is it seen as an inclusive approach? So it's seen as an inclusive approach because it is not a matter of an individual or one country or one continent dealing with it. It's the issue of the entire group, right? So we transition means that it has to be inclusive approach. And when you see inclusive approach, it means that it involves all stakeholders, stakeholders of all types of transitioning to be involved in the process. So it needs to be more inclusive of all stakeholders in the society, in every continent, in our society. We all need to come together to promote justice and to reduce the current inbuilt development of inequalities in society in regards to the climate change and effect that we see, because and research has made us to understand that the current effect or consequences that we are seeing, the effect of climate change, the people that experiences most are the people that contribute less to it, or the nations that contribute less to it. And if I should put it in other ways, like the global south are the least that contribute to when it comes to causes of climate change in terms of industrialization and things like that. But they are the people that experience it most, right? So there's that kind of inequality in that aspect. So when we talk of a just transition, being it inclusive means that we all have to be involved, and then as we transition, and then a just transition has also integrated framework. So like I mentioned with the three areas of just transitioning. So from the literature, we've realized that just as I'm presenting today, and my focus is kind of on the climate justice. And we also have other researchers that are focusing on the energy justice, environmental justice. So what we all need to do is to come together to have that integrated framework, right? Where we can all work together. So it will not be a matter of one person is looking at climate justice while the other person is looking at environmental justice. If it continues like that, it may take a long while for us to achieve whatever we want to achieve. And then over here also emphasizes on distributive justice and of course procedural justice. So like the distributive, like I was saying, and if you look at the proportion of how people are being affected by climate change, is not equal. It's not the same as how we cause it, right? Sorry, I'm just seeing some chat. 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. I've got 5 minutes, so and I have to run through it. So yeah, so this is the impact of climate change transitioning that we are expected to see. So, and there may be reproduction of environmental and socioeconomic inequalities and energy poverty issues, like there will be rising of energy bills, because if we are moving to greener energies, like going for solar energies and things like that, it will be quite high. And of course, loss of jobs. So research has also made us to understand that currently people that work in coal factories and things like that, they will lose their job. So if they lose their job, and of course, this will lead to increase in poverty. And we also know that fossil fuel or an industry, they also contribute a lot in terms of tax and all that into our societies and country, which help us to get the public services that we do enjoy. So if all these industries are going to be put away, then it means that our public services like education, transport, and things like that are going to be affected. And these are the benefits of, a just transition. But I'll just quickly move on to, because I don't have time, unfortunately. So climate change, justice here, it's all about fairness, equity, and rightness. Then, so we look at UBI. So if you look at the picture here, the main idea about UBI is just giving people that unconditional regular amount of money that will be paid by the government and without any means tested. So, and these are some of the definitions of UBI, and some of the characteristics that it has to be unconditional regular payment, and it has to be by the state or the government, and there's no requirement attached to it, and then people are paid on a regular basis. And we've seen pilots on UBI around the group, and some of them, like a list of some of the pilot studies that we've had in UBI. Sorry if I'm rushing because my time is almost up. And then, so key findings from the pilots, UBI pilot studies that has been done so far. So it has been seen that people that receive it they were less prone to food insecurity, they had better physical and mental state, and they were motivated to start a business and engage in a community volunteering and self-development. And so I live in Wales. So I live in Wales. So the Welsh government is currently piloting UBI, which is a basic income, not UBI, which is a good thing to see here. And these are some of the benefits of UBI. So it will elevate poverty, or if you like, it will reduce poverty, it will improvement of work incentives and increase market security, right? And then people will get more training. It will help people to get more training, because currently some people may just want to upgrade, go for further education, but because of lack of funds, lack of money, they are restrained to do that. But you giving them that a basic income can help them do that. And of course, it will enhance technological innovation, like we see, and it will help people that will be affected by robots and other technological advancement. So now the big question is, UBI eco-friendly? If you ask me, I would say yes. So let's answer the big question of why I am here. So the role of UBI in a just transition. So if you remember on the slide on the impact that climate change transition could bring to us, and we could see that UBI will be very helpful here by providing a solution to some of the environmental and social economic and injustice and inequalities that we face, because with literature have made it known that people that when we move to that greener energy, like people, the most vulnerable people may not necessarily benefit from the greener energy, and what will happen to them, right? So and of course it will create some kind of injustice, though we are trying to move in a very just transition in a way that it will benefit everyone, but it may not be the case. So that is when UBI comes in. And of course, UBI will give everyone that a basic income. So if you remember, people that will lose their job because maybe they were working in a coal factory, they were working in a gas factory or oil factory, and is now being shut down. And they have maybe they don't have any skills that will help them get another job in a very immediate term. UBI can come in to give them that a basic income, and of course it will provide income security to those people, and it will help to alleviate poverty that will be created among refugee and climate refugees and things like that. And it will also come in to help with enhancement of technological innovation, because with a basic income, people will now try to get more training so that they will be able to work in the greener sector. So this is what I have to present, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella, and sorry for rushing you. I know it's the role of the bad cop, doing the sharing of the session. If you agree, I think we could keep the questions for after all the presentations. I think it's probably the best. So
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, perfect. We go now to Nicholas. I think you were connected, right? Oh yeah, you are appearing on the screen.
Yeah, I'm here. Morning, well, afternoon, evening. Hi.
Perfect. So you have the word. Please keep it 15 minutes with some tolerance. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, can you see that? Is my screen shared with you yet?
Yeah, working perfectly. Please go ahead.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. Perfect, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Nick Langridge. I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Bath in the UK. And my research concerns the ecological credentials of basic income, its compatibility with post-growth perspectives, and also its potential role in the transition to more sustainable and just societies. So today, just briefly, I'm hoping to outline what I mean by a just and sustainable and just society, and why this needs to embrace post-growth perspectives. Outline some of the theoretical arguments in support of UBI from a post-growth perspective, and then propose an alternative research agenda to add some empirical rigor to some of these theoretical arguments. Has that moved on? Slide. Or is it still the first page? Can you see the second slide now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, perfect. Can't really see from my end, so I didn't know if it was all connected right. Okay, great. So very briefly, we all know the world is facing ecological crises. Stella's just outlined the climate perspective of that, so I'm not going to go into it in a lot of detail. But overall, we've moved out of the safe space on 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries, which mark the safe space for humanity. The world has warmed by at least 1.1 degrees since the pre-industrial revolution, and research suggests that we're on course for at least 2.5 degrees of warming by the end of the century, even if all current mitigation policies are implemented. In addition, 75% of land use has been severely altered, putting 25% of all plant and animal species at risk of extinction. And by 2050, it's expected that global resource use will total 180 billion tons per year. And just to give it some context, the sustainable limit for that is calculated to be 50 billion tons. So overall, it's clear that we need urgent action now to transition our economies and our societies onto a more sustainable footing. However, there's been several recent studies which have shown that environmental pressures cannot be absolutely decoupled from economic growth. And in fact, there's been more recent trends which show a rematerialization of the global economy. In other words, an increase in the material intensity of each unit of economic growth. So this poses some serious questions about the feasibility of further aggregate economic growth, including green growth, and a rethinking of capitalism more broadly. In fact, the majority of researchers now working on climate change mitigation hold growth skeptical positions. So this is something that's very relevant and very known within those working in the field. So when we talk about post-growth, and I use the term kind of post-growth here as an umbrella for various strands of growth critical literature, including kind of degrowth, A-growth, donor economics, etc. And post-growth recognizes the urgent need to transition our societies away from those which rely on the pursuit of further aggregate economic growth, towards societies which pursue the satisfaction of human needs while downscaling energy and resource use in line with planetary boundaries. And the burden of any such downscaling must, of course, fall on the rich, making room for increased resource use amongst the poor. Sustainable welfare is a term that emerges from within the post-growth literature to refer to the social environmental policies, or the eco-social policies, that support the satisfaction of human needs within planetary boundaries and without economic growth. In other words, it's in short, it's the provision of kind of a post-growth, sustainable and just safety net. And there are 4 key criteria for sustainable welfare policies. The first being that the outcomes of such policies must respect planetary boundaries. Second, that they should achieve fair distribution of resources and of the costs, benefits, and opportunities which result from eco-social policies. Third, welfare policies should be designed, adopted, and adapted through democratic and accountable processes at the local, national, and international scales. And finally, that the policies should shift the goal from economic growth towards the satisfaction of human needs. Now, UBI as a policy features predominantly within the literature on sustainable welfare, as well as quite significantly within the post-growth literature more broadly. And in the next few slides, I'm going to outline why UBI is advocated from a post-growth perspective, before going on to argue that empirically evidencing these assertions needs a bit more work. So in line with planetary boundaries, UBI is argued to contribute to the dematerialization of society. So, for example, a fairer distribution of resources could help reduce the wealth effect. That is the relationship between higher individual wealth and higher ecological pressures, as well as status-based consumption, whereby people consume in order to demonstrate their social status and to try and keep up with others within their societies. A UBI could also weaken the link between income and labour and therefore reduce the economy's need to grow through creating unnecessary jobs. Much of the labour we do has been shown to have questionable social or ecological value, so a reduction in working time and a fairer distribution of necessary wage labour would likely have ecological and social benefits. A UBI could therefore give people the opportunity to reduce their working hours or leave the labour force entirely and pursue other activities of social and environmental value, such as volunteering, care work, participating in local democracy, etc. Activities which are time intensive, but also are often less materially or resource intensive. As such, a UBI could reduce the unnecessary consumption and give people the freedom and time to satisfy their needs in non-material ways. UBIs also advocate for its redistributive potential. If funded through appropriate, progressive, non-growth based taxes, a UBI could help redistribute wealth, income, resources more equally. It's also advocated as the best instrument for redistributing work, both paid and unpaid. By recognising unpaid reproductive labour, the majority of which is currently conducted by women, as well as freeing up time for men to contribute to family and community life, UBI is also recognised for its potential to reduce gender inequalities. From a social and democratic participation perspective, by reducing the time people spend in wage labour and the stress associated with financial insecurity, a UBI could increase the time and creative energy for people to participate in social and political life. Furthermore, as an unconditional payment to all, UBI would ensure that everyone had an equal opportunity and right to engage in social decision-making. And finally, UBI also has the potential to increase human needs satisfaction. Now, human needs frameworks or theories, for those that are less familiar with them, basically provide an understanding of well-being in which needs are seen as common to all people across space and time. However, the means for satisfying these needs are infinitely varied according to culture, context, resource availability, personal preferences, etc. And needs frameworks are advocated from an ecological perspective because they can provide a baseline for well-being, and they can also provide a specific focus for resources rather than a more generic focus, for example, on economic growth. They also support non-material means of satisfying needs. And UBI could provide the freedom and the time for people to identify ways of satisfying their needs better, while simultaneously reducing their material footprint. However, the empirical evidence to support UBI's ecological credentials and its compatibility with post-growth assertions is limited. And its role in a just green transition is under research. A study in 2019 found that less than 1% of the academic literature on UBI addresses the natural environment, and the evidence to support it as an ecological policy is therefore severely limited. Furthermore, ecological questions are under-addressed in UBI pilots. Many interventions align more with green growth than post-growth perspectives, for example, aiming to demonstrate how UBI can help stimulate the supply of wage labour and therefore contribute to economic growth. There's also a lack of focus amongst pilots on changes to material ecological footprints or a study of consumption from this perspective. There's more of a focus on the individual rather than collective changes. And there's a need for better understanding on the interaction between UBI and other complementary policies for helping change our systems of production and consumption. Therefore, there's a need for a greater empirical focus on UBI's ecological credentials, its contribution to sustainable welfare, and its alignment with post-growth more broadly. And so the final few slides, I'm going to outline a proposed alternative research agenda to help add empirical rigor to some of the assertions put forward about UBI's ecological credentials. So first, we need to kind of change our method of empirical research, not drastically, but slightly. When it comes to pilots, pilots aligned with sustainable welfare, I argue, would pursue different questions to those that are asked by many of the pilots today. And if the right questions are asked, pilots can be a really useful tool in providing valuable insights on changes to participant behaviour, patterns of consumption, and time use. I'm not going to go into this slide in detail based on time, but this is just an example of some of the questions that we could be asking and looking at through pilots and other research methods, and how they align with the various strands of sustainable welfare. So from looking at how we can fund a basic income in a way that doesn't require growth, to how people's consumption scale and composition changes under UBI, whether people choose to work less under UBI, and what policies we can use to support that reduction in labour. Second, pilots, I argue, should also look to provide as close to sufficiency as possible, whether this is through the size of the cash transfer delivered, or whether it's combined with an in-kind complementary policies or activities. Sufficiency is required in order to make participation in the labour market a choice rather than an obligation. Pilots should therefore consider integrating plus components. Now, plus components recognise that UBI alone is not inherently ecologically radical, but that realising an ecological UBI requires complementary policies to facilitate social participation, meet needs with low material consumption, and ensure universal sufficiency. Fourth, we need to consider how we measure well-being and move from monetary frameworks more towards frameworks that embrace human needs. Research on well-being needs to include a focus on how UBI could improve well-being or human needs satisfaction outcomes, while simultaneously lowering our material throughput. And fifth, understanding the collective impact of UBI and its role in facilitating democratic participation requires greater use of community saturation pilots over pilots which select random individuals or target specific social economic groups. The majority of pilots currently do select individuals from within a group, which is really great in allowing us to look at how individual behaviour changes. But when we want to know how collective behaviour changes, and where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, we need to consider methods such as community saturation pilots. And finally, we need to consider whether piloting is actually the best method for answering a lot of the questions that remain about UBI, particularly some of the ecological questions. Answering some of the questions relevant to UBI's ecological credentials and compatibility with sustainable welfare may require alternative methods. Some of these methods may be better suited, and it's important to recognise that pilots have their limitations and that they can't answer everything. So pilots are limited by their size, their duration, political influence, funding and logistical challenges, and understanding UBI's role in the transition to more sustainable and just societies requires pilots to be supported by other empirical methods. For example, microsimulations could help address some of the questions related to funding and redistribution. Ecologically aligned UBI would require funding from non-growth-based taxation, which would place the highest burden on the richest households. For example, progressive income taxes, wealth taxes, taxes on land or consumption or resource use. And the potential funding opportunities and the distributional impacts of such taxes could be assessed through microsimulations. In addition, laboratory experiments could be useful for addressing behavioural questions, looking at specific mechanisms which lead to behavioural change under UBI, particularly around judgment and choice. And these are particularly important when assessing the political feasibility of UBI schemes and for predicting some of the economic and social behaviour changes that may occur after UBI's implementation. For example, laboratory experiments can be useful in looking at whether people do choose to exit the labour force under UBI conditions, or how people would choose to change their consumption habits under UBI conditions. And finally, I just wanted to comment on the impact of complementary policies. For example, universal basic services, increased access to the commons, democratisation of the means of production, investment in new technologies, etc. And how difficult these are to build into pilots. So other methods may be useful in helping to better understand the effect of such complementary policies. For example, building them into microsimulation models. So just a few concluding thoughts, as I think I've got about a minute. UBI is seen as a tool, an important tool in sustainable welfare literature. However, testing the assertions put forward in this literature requires pilots with a new research agenda answering different questions and embracing the support of different methods. I argue that an ecological UBI should embrace sufficiency, community saturation, a focus on human needs, ecological boundaries, and the need for plus components. And additional methods, including microsimulations and laboratory experiments, can help support pilots in answering some of these questions. We also need to consider how we build in the wider socioeconomic assumptions into the research design and the impact and need for complementary and supportive policies. And if we do all this, this can help maximize some of the radical potential of UBI and help us to better understand its role in the transition to more sustainable and just societies. And I think that is everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Perfectly on time. Our microphone was muted, but the alarm pointing to the 15 minutes limit just rang the second you stopped talking. So perfectly on time. Thank you for that. We now go to the third and final here we go. So Neil Coleman will bring us a perspective from South African reality. So Neil, please, 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George and colleagues. Firstly, just to indicate that, just to thank Bien for slotting us into this session, although the focus is slightly different. It's not focusing primarily on the climate challenge, although we do touch on it, as well as some philosophical questions which Nicholas has raised in his input. This is a presentation from myself and a colleague at the Institute for Economic Justice, Kelly Howson, focusing on the contestation around basic income in South Africa. So I'm going to briefly go into the background of these debates and outline the current developments in South Africa. Just to indicate that, firstly, despite South Africa being regarded as an upper middle income country, we have a deep crisis in South Africa, which reflects that the majority of South Africans are facing deep poverty and unemployment and widespread hunger. The crisis of hunger is outlined there. University study finding that 1 in 5 households are regularly sending a family member out to beg for food. Over 55% of South Africans are in poverty. Over 42% of South Africans are unemployed, or 11.9 million people. And South Africa is regarded as the most unequal country in the world. So internationally, we know that the issue of a UBIG has relevance to a number of aspects of the intersecting multiple crises, what some have called the polycrisis, including the deep economic scarring, climate crisis, labor displacing technologies, rising inequality, and growing hunger. But because poverty and hunger affects the majority of people in countries in deep distress, such as South Africa, the idea of a UBIG is a concrete, practical demand that people can relate to and support. And this is definitely the case in South Africa. It has widespread appeal. In relation to the climate crisis in South Africa, just to briefly indicate that the idea that UBIG can address the transition to renewable energy, we think is not adequate, because a UBI is likely to be a very basic social protection flaw. And miners and communities affected by the energy transition need a dedicated social protection mechanism over and above the UBI. So this is a matter which has been flagged in the just energy transition policy debate in South Africa, but hasn't really received much attention yet. We argue that a UBIG has profound economic implications, that it can't be fully realized without a reconfiguration of economic policy, particularly if it is both universal and combined with an expansion of public services. So we believe that it is not compatible with austerity, that it promotes a different economic trajectory, an expansive and redistributive economic trajectory, and opens up the possibility of progressive tax interventions, including a wealth tax. We believe that a U-big is relevant everywhere there's economic distress, but particularly relevant in the global south. Interestingly, the debate has, largely been located in the global north, but we think that is going to shift in time. Whether the demand for U-big is a radical one, it's clearly not a revolutionary demand, but it is potentially radical in the current context, pushing towards a reimagination of as Nicholas was talking about, the role of carers and the nature of work. Despite these radical possibilities, the campaign for basic income is controversial in certain progressive circles because of the fear that it will replace public services, undermine workers, and so on. And we have done an analysis recently in a paper which was presented by Kelly Howson to the International Labour Organization, which benchmarks a number of concerns that Ortiz et al. Set out in relation to a U-big. And those are set out there, the 6 conditions, whether it's set at an adequate level, funded by regressive taxation, replacing public, etc. The various proposals for basic income in South Africa against these 6 criteria. And we've attached a table, which I won't go into now, which outlines these conditions. Are you hearing me okay? It's saying the internet connection is unstable. I'll assume it's okay unless you stop me.
Yes, we just lost you, but half a second, so please go ahead.
Okay. We're also arguing that it's progressive for the working class. It runs counter to a certain degree to the logic of capital, insofar as income is not dependent on servicing capital, independent of economic cycles and financial markets, potentially reinforces the power of workers and boosts the reservation wage, combats precarity, particularly if combined with union organization and labor protection, as well as a national minimum wage floor. It also reduces the economic and social devastation caused by unemployment. It gives workers greater opportunities to seek a better quality of employment. And therefore, we argue that it would be a boost for progressive movements. And we refer to a number of, particularly in Latin America, a push for basic income, as well as some countries in. But because of the transformative potential, we believe and have experienced in South Africa that a campaign for a basic income will be fiercely contested by elements of capital as well as conservative bureaucracies. And this is, the experience is that there are attempts to hollow out the demand for basic income, to render it tokenistic in its level, narrowly targeted and means tested as a replacement for public services, linked with conditionalities to coercive workfare and funded by regressive taxation, such as VAT. And therefore, a U-big, certainly in South Africa, can only be achieved through a combination of a range of factors which we outline there. And we are saying that some of these factors are present in the South African situation. Just briefly, the political economy of basic income for South Africa, I've introduced in the first slide some of the deeply entrenched, the situation of structural poverty and unemployment and so on. But this goes back into our colonial and apartheid history relating to landlessness, the small size of our informal economy, the financialization of our economy, and the historical marginalization of Black rural and urban communities from economic centers. But secondly, that before the introduction of the social relief of distress grant, which was introduced during COVID, there was effectively no social security for the vast majority of people aged 18 to 59. Only children and old people were covered. But even with the current grant, the Social Relief of Distress grant, 18.3 million of the 18 to 59 age group live below the food poverty line. Thirdly, I've referred to the deep crisis of hunger and destitution. Fourthly, we have, as people probably know, a crisis of corruption in the country, which has an impact on state capacity and an inability to roll out more complex economic interventions. Whereas with the basic income support, it's very rapidly can transfer income into the hands of the poorest South Africans. And fifthly, the stimulus impact of the injection of income into poor and working class communities provides a platform for economic renewal and development. And this has been demonstrated even with this tiny SRD grant. So the SRD grant in South Africa is about $18 a month, introduced in April 2020, and is being repeatedly extended, although attempts have been made to withdraw it a number of times. The grant has documented impacts in terms of hunger, poverty alleviation, economic stimulus, and I give some statistics there that I won't go into now. Increased likelihood of employment, reduces hunger, impact on the informal and formal traders, etc. In South Africa, there's a sharp battle raging on the SRD grant. We find that this has a massive impact or implications. We have de facto a system of basic income nationally in South Africa. 16 million people are theoretically eligible for this, although there are issues which we outline below around the narrowing and exclusionary sort of elements of the administration of this grant. But it is fiercely contested, and social security advocates are pushing for the SRD grant to be transitioned into permanent basic income support. And it is looking very probable that this will happen over the next couple of years. However, the National Treasury is quite opposed to this and is looking to remove the SRD grant or replace it with a much more limited measure and reductions in the budget that have taken place. This slide outlines the assault on the SRD grant, which has been taking place. And we did an interview with Bien, actually, which is in a podcast, which we've hyperlinked there, on a current court case with which the Institute for Economic Justice and our co-applicants pay the grants are challenging the mass exclusions of people from the grant in court, as well as the retrogression in the value of the grant. And we outline there some of the elements, the exclusionary elements, which have led to massive exclusion of people from the grant. So there is political resistance, but significant support. We have support on the need for establishment of system of basic income by the President of South Africa. We have met with him, and we have a meeting pending with him in the next few weeks, hopefully, to look at pathways to converting this grant into basic income support. But as we indicated, the Treasury and other forces are attempting to roll back this or to replace it with a much narrower grant, such as a family grant or a conditional job seekers grant. The African National Congress, the governing party in South Africa, has supported the introduction of a basic income. So the question of whether we will move beyond March 2024, when the SRD grant is due to end, into a system of basic income is now the subject of very sharp struggles. But in relation to Nicholas's issues and others about the idea of a pilot, in South Africa, we have a national de facto basic income pilot. So the idea of a limited pilot, which is confined to particular areas or categories of people, would be retrogressive in the South African context. Just finally, there's broad support for a UBIG in civil society, including amongst trade unions, social movements, and progressive NGOs. We are part of a coalition called the Universal Basic Income Coalition, which has mobilized grassroots support and engaged with policymakers. There is some opposition to elements of business, although significant elements of business understand the stimulus impact of basic income. And we continue to mobilize other social forces, such as the churches, to try to build this coalition in society. And then finally, we are supportive of the introduction of universal basic income in South Africa. However, we've taken a pragmatic position that we need to move progressively to realization of universality, starting with the food poverty line and progressing towards the higher poverty line in South Africa, and progressively include more beneficiaries over time, progress towards universality. This is in line with our constitution, which contains the notion of progressive realization of social security, and other organizations and forces that have also given support to this notion of progressive realization. So in our meeting with the president, we outlined our view that there are various potential pathways towards a comprehensive system of basic income, and we have modeled different options together with a modeling organization in the United States, in which we outline those potential pathways. And we've attached as an appendix to the slide some of these pathways that are being considered. So ultimately, this contestation, as we speak, is undecided. It's very fierce. There's this process of court action, political engagement, mobilization, and coalitions, which has had significant impact. But the outcome of this contestation is going to depend on a number of things, which we outline here. One of the realities we're dealing with at the moment is that while the commodities boom in South Africa led to quite a large tax overrun, that's of 250 billion South African rand between 2021 and 2022, there has been a collapse in some commodity prices, and Treasury is using this now opportunistically to move into a period of hyper austerity and to argue that this income transfer needs to be terminated. The social instability in South Africa, including the widespread looting in July 2021, in fact, this was subsequent to the grant being terminated, had important elements of food riots. So there is an understanding amongst business and the ruling party that the termination of the grant could be extremely dangerous for social stability. So in conclusion, it's clear that South Africa could become, if we manage to defend this progress that has been achieved, could become a world leader on basic income, and we could, in fact, establish a permanent system of basic income in the next couple of years. The question is whether this South Africa is a bright light in an otherwise dark terrain, and we're saying that time and struggle will tell. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you all. Very, 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 very interesting presentations. So we still have some time for questions. I'll start with the questions here in Seoul, and then I'll pass to Zoom questions. So those connected via Zoom, please raise your hands if you have questions, and I'll get back to you in a second. So here in the room, anyone has questions? Yeah, Joan, please.
Yeah, I have a question to Neil. How about the movement, basic income movement situation in South Africa?
Did you understand the question, Neil? I don't know if there's a microphone in the room, or does it work?
I didn't quite catch it. Sorry. Something about the basic income movement?
Maybe, yeah, wait, I think maybe, I don't know if there's a microphone. So
There are microphones in the ceiling, but you need to be loud enough.
okay, so if you want to just come here, I think it's probably easier.
Okay, my question is that I want to hear more about the movement situation in South Africa.
Basically, no.
Yeah, about basic income.
Should
I respond, or do you want to take a few questions,
Yeah,
George?
let me just see if there's anyone else. I think it's better a couple of questions. Or anyone via Zoom. I do have a number of questions, so but I'll keep it for the end. Please.
And hi all, thanks very much for your interesting talks. I have a question to is it Nicholas on UBI and exit option, and you also talked about democratization of production. Are you assuming here also inclusive of the democratization within the fossil fuel companies? And what would this look like in the context of just transition, do you think? Thank you.
Good questions, thank you. So if there's no one via Zoom, I don't think so. I can give you the word to reply, and then we have a second round. So Neil, as you have your camera on, please, you can start, feel free.
Thanks very much, George. And Kelly Howson from the IJ will also respond. She's very active in the coalition. So we have a coalition of organizations that are mobilizing around basic income. In South Africa, it's called the Universal Basic Income Coalition, but maybe Kelly should just take over to talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the question. The Universal Basic Income Coalition, or UBIC, is a grouping of civil society organizations in South Africa. It includes a number of human rights organizations, organizations representing youth, women, as well as the labor movement. It's just formally kind of come together and adopted the name of the Coalition, but it's existed in some form for a number of years. And the first kind of civil society mobilizing for a universal basic income in South Africa happened around the time of the transition to democracy at the Job Summit in 1998. So this has been a long-standing campaign, but the coalition has been kind of reinvigorated and gained some momentum since the introduction of the social relief of distress grant, which is the emergency cash transfer during COVID. That's been seen as an opportunity to build on and to mobilize for a universal basic income. So the key kind of constituency calling for a basic income in South Africa is the civil society coalition. It includes some academics as well. Back to you, Neil, for the other questions.
I think that was the only question to me.
Shall I go for the one that was to me then? Yeah, related to UBI and the exit option. Obviously, that is actually one of the kind of the unknowns a little bit within, at least in the empirical kind of UBI literature. It's one of the ideas that, the UBI could definitely promote by giving people an alternative source of income, therefore the power to say no to labour that they don't want to do, that is exploitative, etc. It could give people the option to exit the labour force and do other things, to reduce their working time, or to just make the balance between kind of employers and employees a bit more equal. When we come to kind of the democratization of production, it's difficult. You don't want to overstate basically what a UBI could do. And some see UBI as potentially affecting more the consumption side of the economy, and things like UBS, public services, affecting more the production side of the economy. So I wouldn't want to say that necessarily by having a UBI, you're going to massively increase the democratization of production, but a UBI alongside complementary policies, or how a UBI facilitates the implementation of complementary policies, could have big impacts. However, you could also say that by giving people the opportunity to say no to certain forms of labour, giving people an alternative, and changing the power dynamics within labour and production could have, potentially important implications. And that's therefore an area of research that we need to do some more stuff on. I know there's some laboratory experiments happening on the exit option at the moment. And so there would be some interesting kind of findings in terms of how people's behaviour changes under certain conditions coming out of those. And also a UBI could, provide, by providing kind of time, and it could provide people with the time and the resources for alternative forms of production to arise, increasing the strength of cooperatives, production which occurs outside of the private and the state spheres, and production forms which could be more democratic. So basically, in short, I don't think UBI itself necessarily would lead to the democratization of the production side of the economy, but it could play an important role in helping us and supporting complementary policies and other initiatives which can lead us down this path. But all of this, I think, needs more empirical research. I think a lot of these things are under researched empirically within the UBI literature.
Perfect, thank you. So if there are no further questions, I do have one. Actually, I think it could be addressed by any of the three of you, so feel free to reply. And it crossed my mind, actually, based or while I was listening to the merge of your presentation and points, right? About indicators and metrics for pilots or for de facto basic income programs, as it seems to be the case in South Africa, and what those indicators tell us and what we want them to tell us, right? Because we know, well, before that, Neil has said, and I tend to agree with him, but he proposed that basic income could actually be launched or promoted mostly in the global south. But in the global south, and he presented the figures of unemployment in South Africa, we know that unemployment is pretty much measured in terms of global north metrics, or metrics that apply more to the global north, right? Because out of those 44, I think it was the figure of 40 something unemployed people, but I'm very much convinced that a big part of those is employed, but outside the formal labor sphere, right? Which is problematic in a way for financing a basic income, as taxes are not being paid, but they are certainly participating in market activities. They are selling, I'm convinced that a big part of them is actually working in something, right? So my question is, when designing a pilot, and Nick presented a number of very good possible indicators and metrics, one as well, things that are by default positive, right? So reducing food insecurity or increasing the access to food, like Neil said, increasing health conditions, access to health care and so on. Those are clear, but I come back to this idea of employment in a society that is so fixated in employment numbers or unemployment numbers. In the global south in particular, if there's no impact in terms of employment due to the introduction of a basic income, while everything else, well, could be improved, right? Could this not be tricky? So the question, I guess, and now really summing it up, shouldn't we really have specific indicators for the global south that might not be exactly the same that we would use in the global north when looking into the consequences of a basic income? So I don't know who would like to take the floor, but please feel free.
Thanks. I'll make an attempt, George. I think it's a very interesting question that you raise, and perhaps the metrics that we were looking at in terms of the ILO, I think the other part of the answer relates to the issues that you've raised, with the concrete impacts on quality of life, on supporting care work, economic activity in depressed communities, and so on. Part of what I outlined in the political economy factors was that the reality is that the informal sector in South Africa is very small compared to our peer economies. So actually, those unemployment figures are quite real and incorporate a lot of precarious economic activity. So that, but if you look at just putting up the screen, if you look at the I'm just showing you the slides in which deal with the ILO standards. And the ILO standards deal with the question of adequacy of benefits. We are clear that a basic income in South Africa and probably other global South countries is going to be at quite a sort of a low level, linked to the poverty line. The question of implications for gender equity, that's relating to the question of whether it covers caregivers or is only targeted at. We very basic income must be targeted at caregivers, as well as other unemployed people and so on. The coverage of the population that they outline here is in South Africa. We're looking at covering the working age group because children and old people are already covered. The question of the nature of the financing, that it must be progressive, should not be using things such as a value-added tax, and so on and so forth. So the ILO criteria there that we've outlined do go some way to addressing what you've raised, but don't completely deal with what you've said. So I think that that's a very interesting discussion, is to say, what should the metrics be in terms of a basic income aimed at global South countries, and how do we fashion that outside of this sort of paradigm which has tend to be driven by global North sort of considerations? I think that's definitely an interesting discussion for future sessions and for future work. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything, but I was just informed that we will need to wrap up in some minutes, but we still have 5 minutes or so.
I was just going to make two like very brief kind of comments on what you're saying, because I fully agree with you. We're kind of in a work-obsessed economy, and any time where a policy is seen to have negative effects on the supply of wage labor or anything like that, it's seen as kind of a bad thing. And one point I just wanted to make is I think that's something that we need to kind of grasp and own a bit more, and that radical potential of UBI to shift how the relationship to wage labor and reduce unnecessary wage labor within our societies, and the potential of UBI to facilitate that, I think is something that we need to own and be kind of share as a positive potential for the policy, and not say be defending UBI and saying, oh no, actually no, wage labor won't decline. Look, these in these examples, we always find there's increases in people taking up work, blah blah blah. We can say, actually no, the fact that people do or may be able to choose to work less is a good thing. These are the reasons why, and trying to kind of sell UBI on that policy rather than kind of defending it against the standard kind of critiques. In terms of kind of some of the metrics, though, I think it depends on the context that you're in. Like, obviously, the metrics that we want that you'd use within, say, a global North economy, or within, say, richer or certain parts of a global North country would be very different to what you'd see kind of in the global South. And so I'm involved in. I saw Maria in the room, so sorry, Maria, but I'm going to target you. I'm working with Maria on a pilot in India called Work Free. And some of the metrics and the ideas and the goals of that pilot will be very different to kind of the visions that we'd have for a UBI, say, in the global north. And this is partly why I advocate, like I support like the idea of human needs frameworks, because they are very bottom up, and they allow society, communities, on whatever level, to kind of identify what satisfiers they have to meet their own needs in ways that are applicable to that context and that situation and that environment. And therefore, I think you can really tailor some of the metrics that you want a UBI to focus on. And I mean, what's the point in wage labor and work if it's not to help us satisfy our needs within you know, the limits of planetary boundaries? So I think those kind of frameworks could be really useful.
Great, thank you. And I think Maria, yeah, you will be presenting at some point, right, tomorrow, if I'm not wrong?
Oh yeah. And Saturday.
Okay, and Saturday. If we could have still 2 minutes, because hands are raising now. If you could be very, very quick, please. I maybe start with Maria. She was quoted, and then
yeah, just very briefly.
Please.
I was just going to say that Nick's description of the concerns around a just transition really align with feminist concerns and issues around UBI. And that is an interesting point because of the gap that Nick's highlighted between theory and empirical evidence, because of the questions and the framing of pilots. But also this gap, unaccountable at the moment, gap between the UBI's potential and actual attitudinal and behavioural change, which is about social change. So how do we use an economic intervention to create social change? And I was interested to hear him talk about sufficiency, community saturation, and the needs-based framework as moving towards that. But really, I just wanted to ask the panelists whether they felt that UBI with social change was the UBI a prerequisite to the social change or an outcome, part of the social change and outcome of it? That was my question. So what is it? It's a bit chicken and egg, but which do you think comes first, the UBI or the social change?
Great. I hope this was clear. We have yet another question in the room, and then one via Zoom. So please be quick, and we can wrap up still on time.
Yeah, I'll try. So BP has created the concept of carbon footprint in order to divert the attention to the individuals rather than essentially the corporations creating climate change. So I saw like a hint in the presentations, and I can see very clearly how basic income can give a lot more freedom to the individual consumers to make a difference. But I'm wondering, and I'm really hoping there are some answers on that. Do you think basic income can play a role on breaking these dependencies, on changing things on a systemic level, possibly in the ways that degrowth has some answers? Do you think basic income has answers in that regard as well? And maybe Nicholas and Stella, I would like to hear more your opinions.
Great. So Kelly, please, if you have questions.
Shall I go?
Sorry, I think there's still a question. I don't know if it's a question or a reply from Kelly.
Oh, yes, thank you. So, I just wanted to come in on the discussion around what outcomes are we trying to achieve. I think it relates to a number of questions that have been raised. And of course, speaking specifically from the South African context, I do agree that that UBI has different imperatives in high and low income countries. And in terms of our engagements in South Africa, you know, fundamentally, what we are trying to achieve first, as a first priority, is the realization of socioeconomic rights, the realization of fundamental rights, particularly in South Africa. We have a constitutional framework for this, which provides the right to food, to adequate food, and the right to social assistance to meet essential needs. And so that's kind of where the debate is taking place in South Africa at the moment. We want to frame UBI as a method for addressing hunger first and foremost, because that is our number one concern and our most pressing priority. But then at the same time, of course, there are other outcomes and other kind of spillover effects of UBI that we want to achieve. And this is dependent on the design detail, the way that UBI is implemented. But after meeting basic socioeconomic rights, we're hoping to unlock inclusive economic growth and address inequality. So we want a redistributive UBI. And then, of course, there are the social impacts, which include, again, in the South African context, a big focus on relieving or going some way towards compensating the unpaid care work, which disproportionately is performed by women, although acknowledging that a UBI is not, of course, a silver bullet for gendered inequity in our economy. So the question of what comes first, economic or social change, I think speaking specifically from the South African context, we're stuck in an austerity framework that seems to be impossible to get out of and is and has all kinds of negative social impacts. So our view is that if we can, if there's a political moment of opportunity to get basic income over the line, if we can achieve that, then we challenge the austerity framework and we can enable some of those social impacts to start happening.
Great, thank you. Nick and or Stella, if you can reply to the two questions that were posed, please keep it to 1 minute or so. Thank you.
I'll try and be as brief as possible. So regarding UBI and systemic change, I think there are two key areas where UBI can play an important role in kind of helping facilitate some of the more systemic changes. And first is how it's funded. For example, if we funded a UBI through kind of progressive income, wealth, land, capital gains, resource and carbon taxes, that could have some radical implications for the more structural elements of the economy. The second is in terms of what we've been talking about before, kind of the wage and the exit from wage labour or reduction in wage labour, I think could also have quite radical implications because it just shifts that power away, that power dynamic in favour of workers. And so therefore, and those people that are actually facilitating production. It also would allow kind of the alternatives to be built. People have that option, that time, that resource to consider, well, what are alternative means of producing the goods that we need? What are the goods that we need? And give people kind of the time and the resources to come together to think about that and potentially kind of start to enact some of those alternatives. I mean, within the degrowth literature, it points to kind of three areas of which kind of a degrowth transition would come about. One is kind of building these alternative systems in the cracks of the current system, and I think a UBI could contribute to that. Policy change from the top down but I think a UBI could contribute to that by giving people the time to engage more in kind of the democratic and the political sphere. And the other is in kind of collective action and the demand, like being out on the streets, things like that. And a UBI, again, would give people the time and the resource to kind of potentially do that. But I don't think UBI alone is radical. I think it could be funded in the wrong way. For example, if we took away all benefits and all of the public services and funded a UBI in that way, it would have to be inherently bad. So I don't think UBI in itself is a silver bullet policy, and it kind of depends what accompanies it. And that maybe comes to where Maria's question about kind of what comes first, social change or UBI. And I do think it is a bit chicken and egg, but I would probably say that I kind of see UBI maybe as a bit of a backdoor entry to more radical change. And so if there was something like a UBI in place, could that potentially have a cascading effect to wider social change because of some of the reasons that we talked about and I was mentioning before. Sorry, that's very, very quick, but hopefully that's not taking.
No, thank you. Very, very clear. On that, indeed, I think I've written somewhere that it could be, sort of readapting Philip's sentence some time ago. It could be a productivist way to create a post-productivist economy. So I agree with that sort of sneaky strategy. Anyways, I really need to close this session. Thank you all for this hour and a half. It's actually, if I may say just as a very final remark, it's good to see that in this Congress, we have so many contributions and perspectives outside the European Union, Europe, and the US. and so many panels and talks about ecology, because as Nick has said, well, and I myself am a witness of that. When I started researching basic income and ecology some 6 or 7 years ago, there was very little research on that. I remember the Congress in Lisbon was pretty much myself talking about basic income and ecology, and now we have full panels and we have a lot of people talking about that. So we are moving certainly into the right direction. Thank you all. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.